Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Meadows, and I serve as the Director for the Division of Energy Assistance within the Office of Community Services and the Administration for Children and Families. On behalf of the division, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on completing the Federal Fiscal Year 2023 Household Report short form version. Slide 2. Today's webinar will focus on the key items needed to complete the fiscal year 2023 Household Report short form, which is due in the online data collection system on December 15th, 2023. The purposes of today's webinar are to review the key requirements for completing the short form version of the report, to explain changes made to the report for fiscal year 2023, to review the data you need to prepare the report, and to review the process for submitting and updating your report. The audience for today's webinar include tribal and select territory grant recipients that are required to submit the short form version of this report. LIHEAP staff and contractors who assist with completing the report are also in attendance today. If you have staff unable or you want to hear this training again, today's webinar will be posted on the Administration for Children and Families YouTube channel. Next slide. Today's webinar is being conducted by APPRISE. APPRISE is a nonprofit research institute contracted with the Administration for Children and Families to provide training and technical assistance for LIHEAP. APPRISE has worked with tribal grant recipients on reviewing and verifying the quarterly reports, and they also provided one-on-one support to tribes for performance management and reporting needs. We have two presenters today from APPRISE. Dan Bouch has worked on LIHEAP reporting and training for more than 10 years, and Melissa Torgerson is a former LIHEAP coordinator for the state of Oregon and has worked regularly with grant recipients to assist with in-depth technical training and assistance. We greatly appreciate you joining us today, and we hope today's webinar will be valuable. With that, Melissa, please take it away.
Hi, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to talk today for about 60 minutes, and that includes a Q&A period at the end of the session. The slides that you're looking at right now, as well as a number of handouts, are available in the GoToWebinar sidebar that should be on your screen. It will be under the handout section. If you expand that, you'll see 3 PDFs, a Word document, and an Excel document, all which can be helpful both during and after the webinar. As Megan mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to listen to it again if you missed something, or if you want your staff to hear it that weren't able to attend today, and it will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. And once again, the handouts that we're passing out include these slides, but they also include a number of resources that might be helpful for you and your staff as you prepare to compile this report, compile it, and then want to check it after you're finished. So as I mentioned, we will have a Q&A session at the end of this slide deck. If you have a question, though, we encourage you to ask it as we go along by typing them into the question box in your GoToWebinar sidebar. And we've put a little diagram here so that you can see what that looks like. If you're not seeing the sidebar, there should be at least a little kind of strip on the side of your screen where you see an orange arrow, and clicking that will expand the sidebar and help you see those handouts and the attendees, as well as a question box. We'll review your questions as they come in, and we'll respond to them at the end of the webinar. And if for some reason we have a lot of questions or we can't immediately answer your question, we will follow up with an email directly to you. So I'm not going to review this word for word, but we know that many of you will take this presentation, print it out, and look at it more closely after the webinar, or perhaps hand it to someone who might be helping you with this report. And so this is kind of like a table of contents. It will help you find key pieces of the report that, or this session that you want to go back to, or as you're doing the report, maybe key sections of the report that you want to focus in on. And so this is just a helpful guide to this slide deck. You'll notice our slides are also, they have a lot of words on them because we want you to be able to use this document after the training as kind of a guide for helping you compile your report. Now we're going to start with a poll question. And this question is, how familiar are you with the LIHEAP Household Report? Are you not at all prepared So you haven't turned attention to this. You're a little bit prepared. So you're aware of the report, but you haven't planned on it yet, or you haven't gotten started. You're mostly prepared. You've already started planning on who's doing this report, pulling data together, and maybe working out some issues that you see coming up. And then very prepared. You're already working on it. You've done it before. You understand it. You're just coming to this webinar for a little refresher and to make sure you understand everything. If you could click the response that best fits, Joseph will give us the results.
We have about 10 more seconds for people to respond. It looks like it was everyone.
All right, so we have a very good mix. So hopefully those of you who are feeling not at all prepared will leave feeling at least a little prepared, and a little prepared people will leave feeling mostly prepared. And those of you who have done this before and are just kind of listening in because you want to make sure you're doing everything right, hopefully you'll learn something new and affirm that you are headed in the right direction. Keep in mind throughout this webinar that this is just a starting point. If you need help with this report at any point or more in-depth assistance, you're welcome to call a prize or your liaison, and we'll give you all that contact information at the end of the slide deck. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to be here. I'm going to start with an overview of the history of the household report and what the short form is. So the LIHEAP Household Report has actually been collected in some form since the 1980s. So it is a historic report. It has history. And it has been split into two different versions. One version is a long form, and that goes to the state grant recipients and some of the territory grant recipients that receive a larger amount of LIHEAP federal funds. That's a longer report. It requires more kinds of data that have to be used to calculate the report statistics. And then the other version of the report is a shorter version called the short form, and that is for all tribal grant recipients and for smaller territory grant recipients in terms of the funding they receive. So today we're talking and focusing on the short form. So the household report short form collects two different kinds of information that we're going to talk about through this webinar. The first has been collected for years and years, and that's the number of households, the count of households that receive each type of LIHEAP assistance in a specific federal fiscal year. So how many households got heating assistance? How many got winter crisis assistance or summer crisis assistance? So that has been collected for years, and that's being collected again this year for the fiscal year 2023 report. Then there is new information that's being asked for the first time this year, and it's demographic information. And we're going to go over this in detail, but there's a number of different counts that are being asked for different kinds of demographic categories. And some of them are items that are required for this year, and some are optional. So we're going to look at that a little bit later in the webinar. So it's important to understand why you're asked to do this report and why the report is important. So the household report is asking you for information that helps track how many households are receiving different types of LIHEAP assistance. And that's something that has changed over time as more grant recipients have focused on cooling assistance and cooling needs, for example. It helps to document the demographic characteristics of who's receiving LIHEAP assistance. Those are the new items we're going to talk about. The Department of Health and Human Services that administers LIHEAP at the federal level does have to respond to requests for information about what the LIHEAP program is doing and how funds are being used. And so the information that gets reported in the household report can help to answer those questions. And it also, the information helps communicate to the public about LIHEAP and about what tribal grant recipients, the impact that you're having on the households that you serve. So I want to show how this fits in with your other reports that you submit to HHS. So the starting point is that right before the start of each federal fiscal year, you submit a LIHEAP model plan, and that is a document that says what you plan to do in the upcoming fiscal year, the kinds of assistance you're going to offer, how you determine benefit levels, what the minimum and maximum benefits will be, information on the LIHEAP assurances, all this information about what you're anticipating and planning to do for the coming fiscal year. It talks about the characteristics of your program, so you can find out a lot looking at the model plans. Then during the year, you're asked to now submit the quarterly LIHEAP report. And the purpose of that report is really to have more real-time information on what LIHEAP is doing. And that information is taken and it's put onto a website dashboard that anyone can go and access and find out what different grant recipients are doing and have done recently with their LIHEAP programs. Then we get to reports you submit after a fiscal year ends. And there's two different types of reports you submit at the end of the fiscal year. One is the fiscal reports, which are the carryover report and the SF 425 report. So those are information about how you obligated and expended funds in the past fiscal year. Then you also submit the household report, and the household report is looking back at the prior fiscal year and reporting on how many households you served and their characteristics. So all of these together help paint the picture about how LIHEAP funds are being used and what your programs look like and how you're serving households that need assistance. So now we're going to talk about what's new for the 2023 report. I know from the poll, many of you are maybe newer to the report or not feeling prepared. So we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on each section of the report. But here we're going to really highlight what is new and different from last year, if you worked on the report last year. First is that in June, there was a communication and action transmittal, they're called, about this report, and that had the instructions and the due date for the fiscal year 2023 report. Those are included in the handouts again on the panel, the GoToWebinar panel you should see on your screen, on the side of your screen or on the top of your screen. So you can find those and look at those if you haven't seen them yet. So the due date is approaching. It is December 15th. The report is going to be available in what's called the Online Data Collection System, or OLDC. This is the same system where the model plan is submitted, and this is where you'll find your prior year household report short forms if you've submitted that in recent years. So same location as in the past, you'll be submitting this report. When you do go to submit it, you need to enter the data into the form. Then you have to go through kind of a step-by-step process where you enter it, you save the data, you have to validate and certify it in the OLDC system. So we have some information about that later in the slides. Okay, so there's one main change from this report from the past, if you've worked on it in the past, or if you're looking at your report from last year. And that is that there are new sections of the report that collect demographic information. Now, if this is something you haven't heard of before, we don't want you to panic. These sections collect some basic information, but there's also categories to report if you don't have the information, if it's unknown, or if it's missing. So you'll see that later on. The reason that this change occurred and this was added to the report is that the demographic information is really critical for assessing success in outreach and how LIHEAP resources are being distributed and to assess the equitableness of the distribution. So this is a new item that was added, and it went through the government comment and approval process. Okay, next slide. There's also been one minor change we just wanted to point out for you, and that's in the report. It asks about how many households you served with your traditional crisis assistance to help someone who's in an emergency situation, to help them resolve that situation. So it asks about winter crisis, summer crisis, if you have those separate, and it asks about year-round crisis. But some of you may have other special types of crisis assistance that are separate from your traditional, this person's facing an emergency and we need to help resolve that on their bill. Some of you might help with equipment needs when someone's heating or cooling equipment breaks, or if you have extra funds, you might have a special separate crisis. So lines have been added to the report that are labeled as other crisis assistance, where you can report on households that receive those kinds of special crisis that's distinct from your main crisis assistance. So again, that's a minor change. It may not apply to you, but you'll notice there are new lines. So here is the sections of the report. There are 6 sections. Section 1 is what the report has been for many, many years. And sections 2 through 6 are the new demographic items. So you're asked about owning and renting for households that you assisted. And you're asked also about race, ethnicity, and gender for the primary applicant for the household, and as well as optional items for all household members. So as I mentioned, the report the due date's coming up December 15th, and we have included some tools to try to help you with preparing if you're turning your attention to this now. There's an Excel spreadsheet that shows a simple version of the short form layout, so you can see that. You can also see the full version in OLDC if you log in and navigate to the household report. There's a special document we made called Check Before You Submit, and that's also in the handouts. And that's really a checklist you can go through to make sure you are ready to submit your report and have filled it in correctly. So it asks different questions and it gives you an answer explanation to help you. And then there's an OLDC guide that we'll make available that also explains how to use OLDC. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the data that's needed to complete the short form, what kinds of information you need to do this report. And I'll turn it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Dan. So as Dan mentioned, all of these different reports tell your LIHEAP story, right? They tell how you plan your LIHEAP program, how you want it to look, and then how it actually looked. Who did you serve? Where did you put the money? Where did you think things were most important, and how did you direct your money that way? All of these pieces tell this kind of overarching story, but in order to do that, you need to be collecting some, at least some minimal data in order to complete these. Now, in this section, we're going to talk about that. And I want to once again emphasize that this is a starting point. So for some of you, you're going to look at this and say, gosh, we really struggle to collect this data. I don't even know where to find it right now. Please, if you need assistance, give us a call. We've helped several tribes kind of come up with just simple spreadsheets they can use to track some of this this data so that they can get these reports completed, but more importantly, so they can actually talk about what they're doing with their money and even look ahead to say, maybe we want to do something different. So in order to calculate the data needed for these reports, you're going to really need to be looking at the number of assisted households across different categories like heating or cooling or crisis. So to calculate this, you really need to have a data set or a spreadsheet with information. And you may have a fancy system too, but I want to emphasize that's not necessary. You just need to have something that includes information on who was assisted in FY 2023. Now, remember that regardless of when your own program is on the calendar year, the federal fiscal year is from October 1st to September 30th, and that's what this reporting period is. So if your LIHEAP program goes from, say, January to December, we're still just going to want to hear about the people you serve from October to September, and I'll emphasize this again later. For each item in the short form, you're going to need to talk about the people in your data set that are relevant to that section. And we'll show you that soon. And then you're going to need to count up or sum the total number of households you identified and make sure you're counting them correctly. For most of the items in the short form, you're going to be counting assisted households, and assisted households are those who received a benefit. So to calculate the counts needed, you need the following information for each of the households that you help. You need the type of benefits or assistance they received during the federal fiscal year. Once again, that's that October 1 to September 30th time period. So if you are keeping data, just make sure you're putting a date on there that you can use so that if your data goes kind of spans past this federal fiscal year period, you can just pull out those households that fall within this reporting period. The type of funds you use to provide the type of assistance. So was this regular, this is an example, regular or ARPA or CARES. For some of you, you're not just tracking LIHEAP, right? You're tracking maybe some tribal funds or some utility funds. And so you may also want to include those, although for the purpose of this report, we're just looking at LIHEAP. You're going to want to look at the race, ethnicity, and gender of the primary applicant. And Dan's going to talk about this a little bit more and what those fields look like. But for this year, that's going to be whoever was, you may call it the head of household, the applicant, but you're the primary person that you're going to choose to represent that household. Now, there are optional sections this year. Once again, Dan's going to talk about this, but these will be required next year. And so we're encouraging grant recipients to take a look at this and maybe try to start collecting it now, or they should be collecting it now because it'll be reported next year. But if they collected it last year, to go ahead and report it in the optional section this year, and that is housing tenure. So does the household or does the household own their home or rent their home? And then you're going to need to begin looking at the race, ethnicity, and gender of each household member. Now, for some grant recipients, states, tribes, or territories, this is new territory for them. This is they may have been collecting information on the applicant or the head of household, but may not already be collecting information on household members. And so this could, for some of you, this is a big step. And once again, if you need help figuring out how to work this into your applications, how to add this to your data, the way you keep track data, please let us know. We're here to help. So I love this slide that Dan put together, and I'd encourage you to highlight it if you're looking at this right now, or if you go back and look at this later. This is a really good example of the kind of data you should be looking at. So I remember I said earlier, even if you don't have a fancy system, you should have some way of tracking this data. If you were to have an Excel spreadsheet, which isn't ideal, but for some of you, that's what you're using and it works, this is the kind of data you would need for each household in order to accurately complete these reports. Next slide. So I'm going to go over some key reporting points for accurate reporting. And these are things that we've learned from helping different grant recipients over the years. These are things that can kind of trip some people up, but are really important in order for your report to be accurate. So key point number one is report only for those assisted. So this is on people who were actually helped by LIHEAP recipients. And so this includes households who were given a benefit that was paid with federal LIHEAP funds, or who received equipment or weatherization services paid with federal LIHEAP funds. Now this might, for weatherization in particular, this might mean only a portion of the benefit was paid, but even if $1 of LIHEAP assistance went to these households, they should be included in this report. You should not be including households that were served entirely with other funds besides LIHEAP. So I mentioned before, many of you keep one spreadsheet or system for all of your different energy assistance funds if you have multiple. But for this report, we're only interested in those people where a portion or all of their benefit was paid for with LIHEAP. We don't want to know about, now you want to know about this internally, but for this report, we're not interested in households who applied but were denied or did not receive a benefit. And we also aren't interested in this report on about households who applied but were not assisted until after FY 2023. So some of you have very early application periods, for example. Maybe you start taking applications in September for, until your funds, and you wait to pay them until your funds come in December. All of you have very different program designs, but we're really not interested in households who just applied. We're interested in people who actually got assistance. The other key point we're looking at, and I mentioned this earlier, is reporting only for those assisted during federal fiscal year 2023. And so some of you keep a running list, that goes, that spans multiple program or fiscal years. Some of you have program years that don't look the same as a fiscal year. But for this report, federal fiscal year 23 is the reporting period and the focus. So October 1, 2022 to September 30th, 2023, which is why dates are so important in that spreadsheet that we showed you. Because if you do track or have a different program year, track multiple years at a time, you're going to want to be able to pull out the set that's specific to this reporting period. So here's some examples. Household A received a heating benefit on November 5th, 2022. That falls within this reporting period. Household B applied on September 20th and was issued a benefit on October 5th, 2023. This would not be during federal fiscal year now 23. Now keep in mind, some of you will need to just be consistent about defining those end of year benefits. So for some of you, if you approve an application, for example, but don't pay a vendor until after October 1st, but you've approved the benefit before October 1st, then that might count for you in federal fiscal year 2023. You'll need to think about that, and if you have questions about how to handle those kind of end of year payments, where the payment to the vendor is happening in the new fiscal year, but you did everything else for the benefit prior. If that's your situation and you want to talk through it, we can help you figure out which program or which federal fiscal year that benefit should be counted in. This is a trickier one, and this is that thing you always hear about when we say unduplicated counts. We really want to see each household reported only once per line. Now we're going to go over this concept in the webinar, but once again, it's a starting point, and we want you to give us a call if you're struggling with it, because it's not an easy concept to get your head around. Each line in the report, so heating, cooling, crisis, is going to ask for the number of unique households served for this specified category. So if your program allows you to provide the same type of assistance to households more than once in the year, you'll need to only count the household once in the line. For example, if you allow people to come in and get more than one heating benefit, you're only going to count each household once, even if they come in more than once for heating. It is correct to report the same household on multiple lines in the report, since different lines ask about different items. So, for example, if my household received heating and crisis assistance, I would be included once in the heating assistance line and once in the crisis assistance line. Now we kind of have this picture on the next slide. One of the ways, go ahead, next slide, please. One of the ways that I learned about unduplicated counts, and it might be helpful to some of you as well, is this idea of colors and dots. And so the Jones household is, it says purple, but I'm seeing blue. So it depends on what your eyesight looks like. But you'll see the Jones dot is blue or purple in this chart. And they received a heating benefit in November 2022 and a second heating benefit in March of 2023. Now, they received 2 heating benefits, but we only want to count them once when reporting on the count of households who receive heating assistance. So this is where we're talking about the number of dots versus the number of colors. There are 4 dots here, right? We give out 4 total benefits, heating benefits in this chart. 2 to the Jones family, 1 to the Smith family, and 1 to the Rodriguez family. But when we get over to the household count and getting a unique household count, we only want to count the number of colors, not the number of dots. So in this case, we're only counting the Jones, Smith, and Rodriguez households, 3 households. So this is one way to think about it. Now, once again, you're not going to put little colored dots next to each of your households in your data set. I mean, maybe you will, but kudos to those of you who do that. But if you need help trying to figure out how to apply this to your data in an easy way, please reach out. We can help you come up with a formula or a system or a way of using your data so that you can easily get these numbers. I do want to mention something though, Joseph, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit weird. Can you scroll back to that spreadsheet that Dan put together? I apologize. We're gonna rewind quick. Yep, 1 forward. There you go. Notice this left-hand column, ID number. This is what makes it possible for you to count colors versus dots. You inevitably will have someone with the same last name. So some people say, well, we'll just count the number of names. But people have the same last name. Sometimes they have the same first and last name. And so it's very important that you have some identifier. And that could be a number of different things based on where you're at. But something unique that can mark each household each time they come in, so that when you go at the end, you know that the Jones household is number 123, and you're looking for the number of 123s in the data set. So if you don't already have this, I encourage you to think about adding some kind of identifier. And once again, if you need help, we'll help you. All right, now we'll fast forward again. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Dan, I think, for the next section.
Yep. Thanks, Melissa. So we've talked about the concepts. Now we're gonna actually look at the report together and go and talk about the different parts of the report. Okay, so this is what the report looks like in OLDC. It is intimidating to look at it first, but we just want you to see that the basic idea is there's lines on heating, there's lines on cooling assistance, there's lines for different crisis assistance and weatherization. All right, so the main section that we're talking about now is section 1. And as I mentioned, they're asking you to report counts on different assistance categories. You might have a slightly different name for the kind of assistance that you're offering, but the report has standardized categories that everyone is asked to use, and they're listed here at the top of the slide. In general, heating assistance is assistance during the winter months or the cold months. Cooling assistance is assistance if you have a program component that operates during the warmer months. Same kind of rule applies for crisis. But if you're not really sure how to categorize your households, we would first say, look at your model plan, because in your model plan, you have to report using these categories as well. And if you still have questions, we encourage you to reach out to your program specialist at DE for assistance. So you may have noticed when we showed that picture of the report 2 slides ago, there's multiple lines for each type of assistance. That's because beginning in 2020 and then again in 2021, LIHEAP received special funding awards through the CARES Act in 2020 and through the American Rescue Plan Act in 2021. And a decision was made at that time to add multiple lines to the report to know more information about how those funds were being used. So the first line you see for each assistance type is asking you just for the total number of households that were assisted in the fiscal year. The second and third line will likely not apply for many of you because you used up your CARES funds and ARPA funds years ago. But if you had some of those funds remaining that you used to help pay for benefits during 2023, you're asked to report how many households received the type of assistance where the benefit was paid by those special funds. So line 1 is always filled out. Line 2 and 3 are subsets of the first line that should not apply for most of you. But if it does apply, you're asked, let's say you served 15 households with crisis assistance, and you know you used some American Rescue Plan Act funds to help pay for those benefits, you would look at those 15 households and see how many of them were assisted with some amount of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And then you would report that number on the third line as well. So 15 on line 1, third line would be 5, let's say you served with the ARPA funds. There's also, Joseph, if you go back to the image, there's also a fourth line, back one more. That fourth line says reserved for other supplemental funding, and that you don't need to worry about that line. Those lines are locked and you don't have to fill in anything on them. They're just there in the event that there's additional funds released in the future, like the American Rescue Plan Act funds. So the key takeaway there is the first line for each type of assistance applies for everyone. And if you had any older CARES or ARPA funds, then the second or third line may apply for you. All right, now we're going to dive into the new demographic items in sections 2 to 6. All right, so these have again been added to help understand the composition of different households that are assisted by LIHEAP. There was a comment period, and these changes were approved. Next slide. So, we just want to acknowledge right away that these are demographic items, and they're asking information about things like race and ethnicity. And there's a lot of varying viewpoints on how to collect that information and what's appropriate for collecting that information. So you may not think the categories are detailed enough or perfect, but these are the categories that have been added to the report, and they're based on what has been collected for the Low-Income Home Water Assistance Program, or LIHWAP. You, as well as the state grant recipients, are asked to provide this information. And because there are categories in the report that may not suit your needs, there's an other category, and there's also an unknown not reported category that you're going to see for each different demographic item. Okay, so the first new item is in section 2, and that's asking about the owner-renter status of households. So this is optional for this report, but it's going to be required next year. So you're encouraged to look at it and to either report it if you have this information available now, or to begin the process to make sure you're able to report it next year. So you can see on the bottom right, this is what this section looks like, and you're asked how many households own their home, how many households rent with the utilities billed separately, how many rent with utilities and rent, how many have an other type of status where maybe they live in a home that they don't own or rent and can be reported in that fourth category. And then, like I mentioned, if you don't collect this, you don't have this information now, there's this fifth category for unknown, not reported that you can use. This slide has some helpful information for how to report different situations. The one bullet right above the table, households might have one type of energy bill included in their rent and another they may pay separately. For this purpose, you're asked to report households in category 3 if any of their energy bills are included in rent. So if you have questions about this, again, reach out to us, but this is just focused on the status of each household. So if you assisted 50 households in 2023, you would want to report for those 50 households how many own, rent, other, or unknown in this section. All right, next is ethnicity, and this is what this section looks like in the report. So this is asking for 3 different categories. For this item, what is being requested is the ethnicity that has been self-reported for the primary applicant. So if you collect this for all household members, for example, you would only want to report on the primary applicant. Sometimes that's called the head of household or the householder in this part of the report. And again, you have this third unknown not reported line if you haven't been collecting this and don't have it available for 2023. Next. Okay, next is race. And for race, there's a number of different categories that are shown. Again, these are the categories that have been put into this section, but you can see there's an other in number 7. There's an unknown not reported in number 8. And there's also a multi-race in number 6. So you likely will not have this for at least a portion of your primary applicants, and that's okay. You should just report what you have to the best of your ability. Okay, the last item that's just focused on the primary applicant for each household, so one person for each household you assisted, is gender, and that's shown in the table on this slide. Same thing, you have an other category, you have an unknown not reported category, and you're asked to report using the information you have to the best of your ability. So there's 2 more sections, section 5 and 6, and they're optional for this report that's due on December 15th. They are going to be required next year. They look the same as the sections I just went over. The only difference is now you're asked to report for all members of the household. So if a household has 5 people in it, you would be asked to report these categories for all 5 people in the household. So we wanted to make it clear it's optional, but you want to be thinking if you're not collecting this information on how you might be able to start collecting it to report it in the future. All right, so we know there's a lot we've gone over, but we want to go over some of the key final reminders, and then we're going to go to questions.
All right, So as we've mentioned a few times, the report is due in OLDC on December 15th. And so you all should be planning to complete the report by this date. Now, the final household report must contain final data based on your program records. If you need technical assistance in completing this report, please contact us as soon as possible. Don't wait. I can tell you, being a past coordinator, that especially when I was new, I spent a lot of time going around in circles trying to figure something out when a phone call would have been much quicker. And so I just really encourage you to call us, even with the smallest questions, or what you think might be a small question. We're happy to answer that and help. Next slide. So as Dan mentioned, there is one main change to the household report short form for this year. It now includes new sections to collect that demographic information for the applicant. Some of these new items are required for 2023, and then the optional ones for household members won't be required until 2024. Once again, if you need assistance with understanding or implementing these changes, and that's not just about getting it onto the report, if you need help figuring out just how to collect the data, on your application, or to track it in a spreadsheet or your system, any step of the process, please call us. We're here to help you. So to complete this, you need to submit your form in the OLDC system by December 15th. And this is for those of you who might be new. It's accessed through Grant Solutions. We've put the login here. Once you've logged in, you're going to click OLDC to access that homepage. Now, they have a separate help desk, and I encourage you to call them if you're having technical issues. If you're having issues with what you see once you get into OLDC, you can give us or your liaison a call. But if you're just having problems logging in, for example, they are the folks that you want to get a hold of. Next slide. Now we're putting this OLDC submission process here to remind you that it's, for those of you who have not been in it before, it's not a simple, easy click and you're done kind of thing. The individual, you'll have individuals in your tribe who have permission to certify, or territory who have permission to certify and submit based on who set up your OLDC account. So if you're new, you may want to find out who this person in your department is. It could be the grant administrator, it could be your director. It's important to know who it is that can actually certify this and who you've given permission to do so. And it's important to do it before the day it's due. So if you're like me, you'll wait until the morning of the 15th, or maybe the night of the 15th, to go into OLDC and then realize that, oh gosh, I don't have permission to submit it myself. Someone else has to do that. So I encourage you, even if your report isn't done, even if you haven't even looked at it, get into OLDC, make sure you can log in, make sure you understand who, if it's not you, that can certify this report, so that when you do get the report done, it's all ready to go and set up. When you do submit your form, you're going to enter and save it. Then when you're ready, you're going to validate it. So after you've looked at any errors that might pop up, and then once you've decided that the form is valid and correct and there are no more errors, or you've taken care of them, you'll certify and submit it. We've put some links here. Dan's mentioned a few different times. These are over in the handout section of your GoToWebinar, but we've also put links here for the AT and instructions, as well as the check before you submit document, which is really handy for those of you who are putting together this report. We've put a list of our names here at a prize, as well as your link to your liaisons. You're welcome to contact any of us if you need help, and if for some reason we think you should be talking to someone else, we'll get you pointed in the right direction. But I can't stress this enough. Don't wait to call. Give us a call as soon as you need help with any part of the data collection or reporting process. Now we're going to ask another question. How helpful was this webinar in understanding what is needed to complete the FY 2023 Household Report short form? Was it not at all helpful, not too helpful, somewhat helpful, or very helpful. Now, keep in mind, this is a pretty broad question. If you have specific ideas for us and how we can make it better, or comments or suggestions, encourage you to get a hold of us because we appreciate hearing that. I'll turn it over to Joseph and Dan.
So if you can answer the poll, then we'll turn to the questions.
Okay, we'll leave about 10 more seconds. We still have some responses coming in.
Okay, well, we're happy to see that it was helpful for most of you. That's our goal. But like Melissa said, if you have ideas to help us, this is the first time we've done the training for the short form. So if you have ideas, we would definitely like to hear them. All right, let's go to questions. Joseph, what questions do we have?
Okay, so first question that we got. So this one here, should we only be counting households that are receiving assistance the first time they receive it? We pay a portion of bills every month and we count them as served once in the quarterly reports, but then get counted again in the next quarter. Should they only be counted that first quarter they receive assistance, or just the whole year?
Oh, that's a great question. Based on how you described what your program does, you just want to count them once for the first time they receive assistance, because you're giving them the benefit, a little bit of the benefit over time, once each month or once each quarter. For the household report, you're just reporting the households, so just count them once. You can just use the first time for that purpose.
Okay. Just to clarify, for this report, LIHEAP requires us to report the number of unduplicated households. However, for the quarterly reports, we should report all assisted households, therefore duplicated if we serve them multiple times. Is that correct?
Okay. This is where the language gets kind of confusing with duplicated and unduplicated, because the quarterly report is focused on a one-time period, and this is focused on a different time period. And the quarterly report's asking for kind of one overall number, and this is asking for numbers by each type of assistance. So quarterly report is the total that got assisted in that quarter, counting each household only once. Household report is total that got served for each line in the household report, total that got served in the fiscal year, just counting households. But if a household got heating and cooling, that same household is going to be on two different lines in the report. So you just have to be a little careful with the counting. It's each line is household once only, but the same household can fall into multiple lines going up and down the report.
But I think that they were right on when they talk about quarters. If a person comes in January and gets a heating benefit, they're going to be counted in the quarter 2 report. If they come in April, they're going to be counted in the quarter 3 report. If they come in again for assistance. But if they were both heating benefits, then they're only going to be counted once in the household report. So.
Yeah, and I encourage you, if you've not looked at it, if you go to the LIHEAP HHS website, there's a dashboard they made that shows your quarterly report data. And the reason that you would report, my household, Dan's household, got assisted in quarter 1 and quarter 2, and you report me in both of those reports, is because this dashboard is showing how many households you're assisting each quarter, and you don't want it to show that you're serving a lot less households one quarter, just because those people got assisted in a different quarter. So you're counting them each quarter.
Okay, and then another question here. In regards to the fiscal year end, if an application is approved in September, but then paid in October, which grant year is it reported in?
You want me to take this one, Dan, or start?
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
So what we've told grant recipients in the past is that you can determine which program year you feel they should be reported in. You just need to be consistent about it. So if you've approved the benefit but maybe aren't paying the vendor, don't cut a check until after, into the new fiscal year. Many grant recipients would count that in the existing fiscal year as long as it's done, before October 1st. The payment, for some of you, you may not pay a vendor or cut a check until, 45, 60, 90 days after you've already made a commitment to the household. So we understand that some of you will approve benefits and applications within the existing fiscal year, but then they may, the check may not be cut until later. So make a decision about how you want to report them. If you're going to use the approval date, then use the approval date, not the payment. If you're going to use a payment date, then use a payment date with everyone. But just make sure whatever you decide that you're doing it consistently. And we can talk, if you want to talk over some examples or just make sure that you understand that, give us a call. We're happy to walk through that with you.
Okay, next question here. So what do we put under the reserve for other supplemental funding line?
This is Dan again. You don't need to put anything on that line. That was added to the report in case Congress awards LIHEAP special additional funds, but that is not applicable for this year, and it's going to be disabled, so you won't be able to edit it in OLDC.
Okay, another one. If I used funds from last year to pay a benefit this year, should that household be reported?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the household report, you report everybody who was assisted during the fiscal year. And it doesn't matter if the funds were prior year funds, that's fine. You would still count them in the household report.
Okay, if we get a warning or error message while entering into OLDC, can you help us understand what the issue is or how to fix them?
Yes, so that's a really good question and good point. In OLDC, there are messages that can pop up when you go to validate your report, and those are intended to be there to be helpful, to alert you, hey, this could be an issue, you might be missing something here. If you see one and you don't understand why it's appearing, you can definitely reach out to us to ask. They usually have an explanation about why they have appeared. And again, they don't mean anything is actually wrong with what you've entered or your report. They may just be an indicator to tell you to look at something. And in the report, there's a notes section, and we just encourage you, if you have something in your data that you think looks a little weird, or you want to make sure that that is understood if someone's looking at your report, you can always write about it in the notes. So we encourage you to add notes as you need to. Well, I think we have hit our hour mark, so we really thank you all for attending today. Any last words, Melissa?
Oh, just thank you, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions.
All right, thank you for your time, and we look forward to next time we talk to you. Have a good day.